Hello, and welcome to the Ultimate Strategy Podcast, your go-to podcast for everything strategy. Now, each week we'll share a new episode covering a wide range of topics designed to help your business grow smarter by making strategy both approachable and actionable. I'm Devina Patel, Strategy Execution Director at Cascade.
And I'm Laura Blackmore, Head of Strategy Execution. Hello and welcome. We're so excited to have you with us today. This is just the beginning, so stay tuned for weekly episodes. Before we dive in, let me thank today's sponsor, Cascade. Cascade is the #1 strategy execution platform that helps turn visions into reality by working as the strategic brain of your organization. Thousands of businesses around the world use Cascade to plan, execute, and track their strategies in one central place, improving efficiency and speeding up decision-making. By successfully executing their strategies, our customers are making a difference, from deploying life-saving vaccines to engineering the fastest Formula One car. If you want to get your team moving towards your vision in one central platform, check us out at cascade.app, and we'll drop the link in the episode notes. Now, let's get started. Devina, why don't you kick us off with today's subject?
Absolutely. So I think one of the most well-known concepts when we think about strategy, but we will be speaking about the OKR framework and giving you a 101 on everything objectives and key results. So I'll start us off by kind of giving us a baseline definition of what the heck it even means. So typically it's a framework or a process that is super popular with businesses who are looking to set goals around their future ambitions. Now, the principles of it is really making sure that you set ambitious goals, or the objectives in this case, and then also break down those objectives into key results, so OKRs. And those are super measurable and indicate the health or the progress of meeting those goals. Now, underneath each of those key results, the OKRs, you'll also add specific actions that ultimately drive the progress. And you may have heard of initiatives, projects, actions, all really under the same principle, but the idea here is that they need to be accomplished to deliver your key results. So definitely something that I know that a lot of people might be familiar with, but we'll be getting into some of the kind of common mistakes and also enablers of success. So maybe Laura, I'll throw over to you for what are some of the most common mistakes that you've seen when we think about implementing OKRs at a business?
Definitely. Yeah, I've seen it all, to be honest. I think probably one of the most common ones is that it gets mistaken as just a goal setting framework. You know, you just want people to fill in what their objectives are and what their key results are. But you don't actually provide that education or the context or even the visibility into the business strategy to enable people to build their OKRs. I actually had a call with a company this week that said, yeah, we're going to deploy OKRs because we need people to be more accountable. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes you can make, is just saying, I'm going to use this framework because it will really help my business to be focused and it will help my people be accountable. But I think you're really doomed if you think in that mindset, because not only are you not really aligning to the business strategy or the corporate or the long-term plan, you actually are adding more noise to people's daily work. They already have objectives that they're working towards, and then now you're asking them to also come up with OKRs. I think the second thing that I've seen, and this is super common, is that people don't understand what the definition of OKR really means. I think you talked about a moment ago, the O is an objective and the KR is a key result. And then you also have to factor in the work to help you deliver that through those actions, tasks, projects, initiatives, whatever it's called. But I often see people make the mistake of actually having their objective and their key result is the work that they're doing. But if you really look at people's OKRs and say, what you've defined as your key result is not a key result, it's actually a deliverable, that's what you're going to deliver, you still need to be able to assess whether you're getting to the result, and you still need to be able to measure the impact and measure not just that the OKRs are being done or being achieved, but it's actually having the desired impact on the measures or the metrics of the business. So that's also super common. And I think it's really easily solved by that education piece. Maybe you can talk us through sort of the implementation of OKRs and maybe how important that is.
Absolutely. I think you kind of started to echo some of the the themes that you can see go wrong, I think also with any framework, arguably, right? And implementation is super important. And often when we speak to our partners who are thinking about, putting OKRs in place, actually the lack of experience or the kind of poor understanding can really set you on the kind of back foot when you're trying to adopt something like this. It's important that when you roll a framework out, that you provide that strategic concept to your respective people. You've got to make sure that people understand the intrinsic why of your OKRs as well. Simply writing down a bunch of goals and not understanding the motivation will never drive people in the same direction on the ship. And the kind of example that I always come back to with OKRs is that you've got to understand why you're going to that destination. What's driving you, right? Is it the beach? Is it the sun? Is it the activities, the food that you get to do there? And if you aren't linked to the outcome, then you have no drive to get to those places. And something like OKRs is a very simplified framework. I think it's definitely doesn't overcomplicate what a good strategy plan looks like, but the intrinsic why is super important. And most leaders can ignore the importance of this when it comes to kind of the communication of the strategy. And, one thing that I'm keen to mention here is that there's the number one law of strategy communication, right? The further that you move from the top, the fewer the people know about strategy. And I think plugging that gap with a framework like OKR is extra important. And during that implementation phase, you have to get each team on board and ultimately each individual on board as well. And I think that helps with the structuring of your OKRs as well. Like you said, Laura, you want to make sure that people are thinking about each of these layers in the right way. And in terms of a solution to this, it's really over communication, right? I don't think you can ever, communicate too much with things like this, and making it consistent too. Sometimes with rollouts of these, you talk about it once, at implementation, and then that's it. We need to be anchoring on the why continuously throughout your strategy execution journey as well. So maybe, Laura, do you have any examples of where you've seen kind of the implementation, or almost maybe it's also a transfer from another framework, and where it might, need a bit more robust positioning behind it?
I think definitely applicable to all frameworks or terminology that's used in an organization. I think it's definitely not applicable to OKRs. But one thing that I always talk about as being super powerful when you think about deploying OKRs, because it's not just, okay, we're going to pull everything an objective or a key result. That's not kind of the primary goal of deploying OKRs. But something that I always like to talk about is the OKR framework can also be a mindset of making sure that you are agile with your plans. So typically when companies adopt OKRs, it's because they need that short-term focus. And typically OKRs are set on a quarterly basis. I have seen them longer and shorter, but really having a quarterly focus for your teams where they're only working on 3 or ideally around 3 OKRs a quarter. It's a short time. You have 3 months. You can't really deliver much more than 3 major objectives. That can drive an incredible amount of focus for teams, but also forces them to think, yeah, you know what? This OKR is still ongoing and it's going to be active in the following quarter. And you're constantly iterating and reviewing and maybe tweaking it. Maybe the OKR just wasn't quite right, or we didn't quite measure the right things, or we didn't quite deliver the right deliverables. So I like to think of OKRs as more of a mindset shift than a framework. And I think the other most important piece is that the objectives themselves should be really ambitious, and they should be inspirational, and they should lean towards the benefit of the organization. So my biggest tip is always, don't just blindly let people create OKRs without any guidance. I think, like you said, over communicate the vision of the organization, and make sure you have your objective set that you want for more of a longer term. So what do you want to achieve in the next 1 to 3 years as a business? And then when people build their OKRs, they can say, okay, well, in the next year, we want to become the number 1 in our industry. And they can set their OKRs that say, you know what? I can take a piece of that. I can be responsible for helping us be number one. And I'm going to do that through this really inspirational objective. And I'm going to measure it through this outcome focused key result. And I'm going to be responsible for launching a new product, or I'm going to be responsible for hiring a team, or I'm going to deliver some things that ultimately help the business to get there. So I think it's really keeping that alignment and over communicating, but helping people when they write their OKRs to make sure that they are truly OKRs. So I think they would be my tips.
I love that. It's almost like you're saying empower the people with the right vision, the right motivators, and kind of that bigger why to then decide on what the right almost specifics should look like, what the right project should be. And I really like that. And I think this is almost like the IKEA effect, which I know we've touched on before, but when you've built something, when you've put the work in to create something, you are just much more attached to the outcome ultimately.
Definitely.
As well. So yeah. I really like that. I really, really like that. And you touched on building and designing OKRs, right? And I'd probably love to kind of maybe pause there and talk about that, because I think it's important to understand what good traits look like for objectives and the key results as well. So I know that for objectives, when I think about writing them, they've got to be super inspirational and benefit based. You want to be able to see what you're driving and the why. And maybe, Laura, when you think about key results, what comes to mind? What traits should they have?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things when it comes to the key results. One big tip that I always give people when they're building the key results is it has to have some kind of number. And that doesn't always have to be a dollar number. It can be a percentage. It can be a quantity of some kind, but it needs to be a number. It can't be deliver a document. That's not a key result. That's a deliverable that will help you get to a key result that will drive revenue or margin or profitability. So always think about the key result as being what are my North Star metrics that the company is working towards, and is it one of those? And if it's not one of those, is it something else that we can measure on a more short-term basis? So you want to also factor in this leading and lagging, and this always trips people up. It's a really difficult thing to set leading and lagging indicators. But if you think as the leading key results as being more of that metric or measure that you can directly influence, so something that is enabling you to predict, or meaning that the progress is telling you how close you are to the goals that you're getting, versus a lagging key result, which is a business metric that you achieved in the past. So it's a past performance, something like I always use sales and pipeline as the great example. Pipeline is that leading key result. If you're building your pipeline and you're building enough of it, you're probably going to get the sales. But your sales are something that you look back on and say, yes, we did the sale.
And so that's, yes.
Yeah, it's historical. You can only once it's done, and you can sort of reveal that past performance. But your pipeline is something that's leading you towards the sale. And I think once you and it is really difficult. Sometimes things can be leading, lagging. You can kind of flip between them and get yourself into a bit of a mess. But if you can figure out your leading and lagging indicators for each objective, and ideally there's always one of each, that will really help you to make sure that you're going to be able to focus on the right things and be able to not only just predict and measure whether you're heading in the right direction, but also get the sales if it's sales that you're after. So my advice would be making sure that you have a good blend of leading versus lagging, making sure that they're really, really measurable. And then the other thing that I would say is don't just measure something for the sake of it. You need to make sure that you're measuring the right thing. So spend a bit of time on the key results. These are the bits that you can optimize, and the things that you can say, yeah, you know what, this quarter we measured X and we got the result that we wanted, or we actually need to optimize it for next quarter. So kind of be agile in the measurements, but just make sure that they're tied to the core business metrics that you're striving for as well. And don't be afraid to spend a bit of time in this area, is what I would say.
And Laura, I think just to build on that as well, I think you don't want to have too many key results, or in any case, too many KPIs or measures. I think with every aspect of strategy, less is more. And the more that we get into the execution too, you don't want this or the maintenance of your key results to become a burden as well, ultimately. So
Absolutely.
I think it's important to strike the right balance when you're building these. Another one that I find quite interesting is when people are transitioning frameworks. So say you might be moving from a balanced scorecard to OKRs or vice versa. It's not the answer to all of your problems, and scapegoating a framework is also not the way to go. And I think sometimes there's often this kind of connotation that, you change the framework and you'll change the game with your strategy execution. And I think it's important for everybody to also remember that it's not the golden kind of goose or the egg, right? It's combined with softer pieces too, like culture and mindset, what you touched on earlier in the episode. And sometimes those softer things can go under the radar, right? And you could have the most incredible set of measures, KPIs, all of these things, but you have to focus on culture and generating that intrinsic drive as well to deliver on a fantastic framework like OKR.
Definitely. Yeah, it's not a magic bullet. And I think sometimes you can hide behind that framework approach. But the reality is don't strive for perfection. Get a couple of OKRs down and iterate and use that mindset to make sure that you're optimizing gradually. And not being afraid to sort of over communicate. I think that's probably the big thing from this, the big takeaway from this episode for sure.
Yeah. I really, really like that. Great. Well, I think that probably wraps up today's discussion. Laura, any final thoughts or closing thoughts before we go?
No, I would say OKRs are an incredible framework to use, an incredible mindset to practice. So even if you're using other terminology or other frameworks, I think getting into that regular review and being agile with your strategy is something that you can definitely take away from the OKR methodology.
Brilliant. Great point there. So I think that wraps up today's episode. We hope that you found it insightful and it helps you on your journey to better strategy execution.
And make sure you tune in next week where we'll be talking about another exciting topic. It's going to be a great episode filled with practical tips that you don't want to miss.
And in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe to the Ultimate Strategy Podcast on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. Check out the links to the resources that we talked about in today's episode description. And a big thank you to our sponsor, Cascade, for making this podcast possible.
Thanks for listening. And remember, great strategies are only as good as their execution.
So take action, make it happen, and see the results, or OKR results in this case. See you in the next episode for your weekly dose of strategy.